Thank you, and thank you all for coming out here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I should point out that Vikram Seth's Golden Gate came out the same week as my first book, The Adventure. Enough said. I'm going to read from The Poverty of Words, which is something of a family production. It's my poems. The cover painting is by my lovely wife, and the photograph of the poet, which I think is the best ever taken of me, at least since I lost all my hair, is by an old friend of ours. I'm going to read 13 poems, mostly short. We'll start with a political poem. White House Talks, July 2011. Some of you may remember this. White House Talks. The most rational man in the room never sighs or rolls his eyes or interrupts. He projects ideas. He projects the idea that folks have the right to their ideas, and since all folks are folks, all ideas, if sincere, are ideas. Some folks, at most, should remember concern for others. He projects this idea. But the other men in the room, though they believe, of course, in folks, believe more in freedom. Folks are folks if they're free, and they want ever more of it. March for it on their hot lawns under signs that read, "We love our chains." They themselves, the other men in the room, have never felt closer to it, and so they interrupt, roll their eyes, walk out. If money were more overtly present in the room, it would speak of the coolness in the mountains, of children's and grandchildren's weddings, of the need for calm and trust. The whole tone would be different, but they would know what it meant. Instead, it, money, crusts the window like extra humidity. The rational man looking out at it feels confident it will back him rather than these yahoos, and almost sighs, a courtesan among whores. Now, this poem, it has two different titles spelled the same way. For a proud Chicagoan like me, this poem is called Aunt. For a proud Massachusettsian like my wife, it's Aunt. Though you can take your stand in between. All right, Aunt. As time passed and her date didn't appear, she had another drink and smoked another cigarette. Subtly, without seeming to, her wide-brimmed hat blocked every line of sight from other tables to her face, which nonetheless aged. For an hour, she imitated a statue called Serenity, Reflection, perhaps, or even Freedom, then ordered a dinner she could never afford. The waiter lit her cigarettes with an astonishingly calibrated balance between invisibility and grace. When the time came, he displayed the wine list, but left her psychic room to choose a cheap red. Somehow ran interference between the impatient maitre d' and her, absorbed, deflected what might otherwise have been stares. but this charity was no part of her story. As time passed, cell phones ensured that reasons would be made instantly clear, that no one could be abandoned. Smoking was banned, so that the lives of diners were long and fulfilled. Recorded music lifted moods, and a new democratic openness prevailed. If she had waited, the waiter would have introduced himself, said, "I will be your savior tonight," thrown off his tux, her late bad marriage, and taken into his, her bony hand. Heartland. When, for the fourth time that summer, the sky blackens and wind shoves and pulls and howls in all directions, but this time closer, seriously, here. Someone, perhaps Dad, remembers the business about getting into a bathtub. And they all get into the bathtub and hug, with the littlest shrieking among knees. Mom would kill, even now, for a drink. The boy is catatonic. The girl loudly, inaudibly sings. But now, no one remembers Dad's somewhat pro forma beatings, fights, inexorable cheating, or his or her own variously inflicted scars. And as the wind removes part of the roof, siding, drywall, stuff, the rest of the roof, the shower curtain wraps somehow around them as if to join and bless their hug. When they step from the tub and climb over boards and scraps into a flawless evening, they are still wonderfully we, and need not for the moment ask, why God, etc. Hear moaning neighbors, or doubt that someone will help them rebuild in the same way, in the same place. Hello again. The Buddha, reconstituted in a distant future, disappoints. One hopes for detached, ironic, timeless reason, but his mind is full of augurs, gods, and the several baskets of his system. Still, he's flexible. More so than any number of later theorists he meets in the dining hall and rec room or floating in brain gel over the grounds. He learns without interest the history since his time, inquires why we revived him, seems politely annoyed at our response. One afternoon he asks for death. Asked why, he says, to ascend. When told it's no longer an option, he appears more amused than anything, somehow pitying. Eventually released, though promising to check in, he makes a pilgrimage through formerly religious former deserts to an ancient cliff that once contained huge images of him, and now the void. The guard dies. By Droschky, Trapp, and Landau, the worthy and responsible of the realm arrive one icy night at an auxiliary palace deep in the country. Their horses, glad of rest, shiver, piteously snort, and are quickly stabled. Alighting, the ministers of war, the exchequer, public order, education, and other metal chests mightier still warm in their furs, discuss, somber but careless, being heard, issues of state. The smoke of pipes and cigars rewards the single guard, a conscript, young and hale, whose uniform is gorgeous but too thin, whom only the officers acknowledge and who trembles now with awe as well as cold. They pass into the palace, fling off their coats, dine and refresh themselves, then gather in a glassed and darkened alcove from which, unseen, unheard, they watch the guard. During the night, older nobles doze, are laughed awake, and hurry as they can to the window. A table groans with dainties, brandy, humidors. He's 20th Regiment, isn't he? Asks a civilian, showing off. They choose the best. The field marshal names the boy's province, which is praised. No bets are laid. It would mean social death to suggest one. At midnight, the watch should change, but doesn't. And the guard, pale in torchlight, looks around. The watchers hold their breath. Takes a few steps, slaps his arms, then comes again to attention. At 1, the constant wind brings heavy snow, which, to the witness's delight, persists. At 3:15, he slumps. At 4, he falls and is swiftly covered, so that the usual debate occurs, idle and slurred, whether to wake and shoot what limbs are left, or let him sleep. Paradox of the actor. It isn't only the mask, the many, the murderous schedule of masks. It's that when not being fate-crazed, king, seducer, intellectual, he watches a game, chats forgettably, reviews his accounts. And she, no longer a gymnast or mountaineer of emotions, tends, humming, the sturdy, sooty plants on her terrace. And that's the appeal. That feeling, destiny, even the worst, the most boring, ours, will be removed like makeup. One stays in character a while, through the curtain calls, but then it's off to the islands, the long white beach, the poolside drink beneath stars and thatch with vaguely familiar people. I mentioned, explaining my pronunciation of A-U-N-T, I mentioned my Chicago background. I left there when I was 15, but it's still the city that makes most sense to me. And I like going back, so here is a Chicago problem. South Side. East of Midway, 55th becomes 2 Garfield Boulevards, a half-block park between. In summer, at every intersection, alone or in groups, people sell bottled water. They face the street, the burnt, boarded and empty, or barred and crowded apartments. Wind from the cars lifts plastic bags and paper from grass and sidewalks. Kids shuffle towards basketball, picnics, and dealers in the park, are yelled back by stick-limbed or very fat grandmas in lawn chairs in the shade of trees beside coolers. The cars seldom stop, whether all their windows are down or up. Yet at the corner of Normal, Ada, Throop, Racine, Union, LaSalle, an arm waves a bottle, a sweat-ringed mouth calls, so that it seems one person, and as if repetition attempted to say, I'm fulfilling a role, am needed, have purpose. No sale. Half a line from the New Testament is the title, Even That Which He Hath. A man with few friends and no way to make more renounced, one by one, those he had. He told them in accents of psychological acumen what had always been wrong with them for him. He spoke in that sing-song which knows it's intolerable and imitates patience. They stared, too incensed to want the last word, and left. For the space of a block, a minute, they might have been recalled, then disappeared as friends do without trace. But the issue is why he did it. It's how one recaptures youth by its stupid gestures, or summons and finally disproves final rescue, or lives the last chapters of forgotten novels. As for where it occurred, where else but those places whose tables are never entirely clean, whose food repeats on one, whose music fulfills the reigning purpose of music, to numb the staff and hurry the eaters. I like science fiction, I always have, and I don't make use of classical mythology, I make use of science fiction. So my substitute for mythology, and in a way that I could be very long-winded and boring about it, it is in crucial respects the opposite of classical mythology. It's future-oriented, amoral, non-patriarchal, open-ended, etc. Okay. Here's one of my science fiction inflected poems. It's called Cure. I suppose the Buddha poem was too, below him. But here's Cure. When they awake 3 days after the procedure, they promptly sit upright to show themselves our equals or in fear. And unless the family that cut them off when violence, theft, and filth grew too intense survives and is there, it's us they see and talk to first. However disoriented, they seldom look for their carts or bags or squares of cardboard, at most for trinkets that were always with them, and are plainly glad of louse-free hair, white sheets, and teeth. Some ask if they're in heaven. We run our tests, eye, hand, simple performance. Some find it hard at first to concentrate on voices undisturbed by other voices. Then they worry where they'll have to go and what to do, and some what town or year it is. Then, invariably, they cry. But only one, in my experience, said, "It came on early with me. I never had a center," and stared at us with his new sharpness. "We've given you," I told him honestly, "something generic, liberal, and benign. You won't hurt anybody and can learn. The The patient, after a long pause, said, "Okay." What else is new? The suffering of others is a cake that I will have to eat, though my teeth are a mess, and its lower layers are compressed to stone by those above, which extend out of sight and are always, of course, rising. It's walled with florets of sugar and has different flavors, all equally cloying. So, an eternity of puking, though I take my time, and insulin shots, and every systemic ill before I reach the inedible icing I caused. Another political troll. Not the fuzzy Scandinavian kind. Troll. For once, let us libtards, liberal retards, not speculate whether the world around him is a basement, a crazed abusee bustling their kids off to church, his mother, or a fellow despairing salesman at some forsaken dealership. When he opens his computer and clicks on an enemy site, he's no longer whatever stereotype we, however justly, imagine. He's a knight defending what everyone knows against our science. First on the scene beneath the articles, he chips away at our lies. For every 10 scandals we mention, he can name one of ours. For every 100 fat cats. His passion rises until he can type the precious word stupid about us. And while he works for love, for nothing, he's the creator of wealth, the superior man, wealth itself. The moral arc of the universe is short and bends towards him. The former tenants. Perhaps it's the recession. Perhaps the barred windows odd in this neighborhood, or an echo of screams in the walls. Except that such effluvia don't exist. Paint cures what it covers. People live shamelessly where prisons were, and torture. Which probably didn't happen here. The caregivers were mostly big and ponderous, not patient so much as having their disgust under control, accustomed to it. They seemed, when outside, leading their charges to the van for visits to specialists or day trips, like bison herding people. Pale, nervous, stooped and hooting people. People who stopped and cried and had to be convinced to move. A few, judged harmless and unlikely to be harmed, ranged freely. The sunken-eyed and somehow mouthless man who inched his way to the corner. The youth of 40 who strode with an empty backpack, shouting in whispers. The small man mountain. The earnestly, shapelessly gabbling crew cut one, visible only from certain angles as a woman who wanted to be friendly, but wanted, above all, a cigarette. gone now. Mysteriously, but not really. For years across the street, I tried to grasp what they saw, failed. Now, only the bars remain, and stained, cheap walls awaiting the revival of the market, young upscale couples, children, preserved meanwhile by a thin coat of pity. Mm-hmm. And finally, here's another title that has to be, well, this title has to be pronounced a certain way. It looks like it's just the man. It's not. It's the man. The man. Okay? All right. Despite the risk, which is small for the seldom photographed, I treasure quasi-unprotected passages from limo doors to the doors of older buildings. One day on such a sidewalk, I'm approached by a ragged, malodorous fanatic who, in the instant before he's blocked, cries, "Jesus died for you." All afternoon, at meetings, in the presence of lawyers who smile as I sign things, at the club and at dinner, thoughts of that encounter return. That night I gaze at the lights of the city below. They extend in my mind beyond the horizon to the towns that huddle around wire fences protecting kids from vacant factories. I imagine the people, some bravely not drinking, nor abusing each other in those towns, and bless them in my heart. But am drawn on by the lights to other places where I have or sold an interest. The little cities with their touching new museums of something or other, austere parks, people gamely still sending out resumes and standing in line. Then the prairies, the box stores, the prisons, the farms. In a kind of rapture, I see the mountains and lingering day out there, the desert's thirsty ambition crosses, the incomparable roads along which sleepless drivers, skirting my former maquiadoras, now themselves elegiac, outdated, bestow on the heartland their loads of methamphetamine. Everywhere there is striving, everywhere people I bless in my heart, as I think I've already stated. Everyone dies for me. Thank you.
Fly on the wall.
They all are something.
I know, it's good.
Why the title?
What?
Why the title?
Oh, Poverty of Words? It wasn't my idea. It was my publisher's idea.
Because certainly you do not have that.
Well, I approved of it because there's a certain irony.
Did you write it in a copy of poems, a collection written over a period of time, or how long?
I sent off 6 collections arranged. I should simplify this. I sent off 6 collections arranged as 3, so double collections, 120 pages each, to an open reading series. And I got an email back from the person who turned out to be my publisher, who writes as if he is being charged $1 for every word he uses. No, dear Mr. Pollack, nothing like that. What he wrote was, "Can I pick and choose?" So I wrote back, Yeah. So, shortly thereafter, I got a list of poems from these 6 books, saying these are the ones that I think will work, and I'm leaving it up to you to arrange them. And here's the title I suggested.
How long did it take? Was it years that you were writing?
I write fast, and I write a lot. I think those 6 books took a bit over 3 years.
Took a bit over what?
Eh?
The 6 books took what?
A bit over 3 years, maybe 3.5 years to write. Before 1998, I had been writing for 17 years, and I didn't count how much I'd written. In 98, my second book, which unfortunately the wonderful bookstore here does not have a copy of, but it's available on Amazon, hint, hint. I changed my style. I thought, okay, I'm going to see what I can do with lyrics, short poems, and the kind of lyric narrative hybrid instead of the longish poems or book-length poems I've been writing here before. And shortly thereafter, I thought, I've got to keep track of them, because if I'm writing short poems with titles, I could repeat a title, God forbid. So I've kept track. And since 98, I've written 1,217 poems that I've kept. In poetry, some poets are ostriches, some poets are frogs. Ostriches, with a great deal of squawking and flapping, produce 1 egg a year. If it doesn't work out, sad ostrich. Frogs spawn. I'm a frog. Anyone else?
Put me in the scene of writing a poem. There's paper, there's a computer, you're in...
Varies. Varies. I have a wonderful notebook, Canadian, lined, very solid notebook. And sometimes I'll write it longhand in that notebook. Sometimes I'll do the first draft on the computer. It varies. I find it very difficult to write when I'm traveling. I have to be at home at my desk, surrounded by plastic animals, like Freud. What can I tell you? Anyone else? And if I don't stop until I'm done. That's the trick. You know, I just don't stop. My lovely wife is nodding. She will have to say several times, you must absolutely come down now for dinner. Dinner is ice cold. Things like that. Coming at 7 o'clock.
Fred?
Yeah.
In the launch of a book like this, we're having this evening together. Have you targeted certain other places where you will read in order to let people know? Washington, obviously.
I've given a number of readings in D.C. where I have various contacts. It was just a stroke of luck that I knew Richard from the old days, and that our mutual friend, old friend of mine, Kevin, was able to get in touch with him and say, Fred, remember Fred Pollack? Yeah. And I'm ecstatic to be reading out here, flying out here for this purpose, as well as to see friends and relatives. But it isn't that easy. There is a massive catch-22 in the poetry world. Many of you know what I'm talking about. If you are not a big name, you are not treated like any sort of name. All right, 1 or 2 more? Yeah.
So you clearly trusted your editor to make the selection. Will you put out a poet's cut?
Only in LA.
From your lips to the ears of, I'll tell you my fantasy. It's not dirty. It is meaty, but it's not dirty. Stanford University Press. Stanford University Press put out the complete Robinson Jeffers. Robinson Jeffers is one of my gods. And Beautiful, 4 volumes, hand-tipped photograph of him, beautiful print, it's enormous. Okay, I'd like that. Dig? Okay, if any of you have any pull, I'd appreciate it. Talk to me later. But I take what I can get. Last year, I think I spent $600 on submitting manuscripts to contests. None of them were accepted.
But a lot of single. A lot of poems, single poems were.
A lot of, well, yes, a lot of single poems, but not manuscripts. So, yes, I mean, if you Google Frederick, poetry still has, there's a very old-fashioned set of attitudes. Many people believe it's not real if trees did not die for it. I had to give that attitude up. But I've had a number of print publications too. All right, one more. Yeah.
Your last line is often an ironic metaphor that overturns or gives a whole new perspective. When do you write that? First?
Smart man. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. You have to start at the end. You have to start at the end. You have to build towards the end. And this is true whether you write prose or verse. The desk drawers and the computer files of the world are littered with great beginnings. There is this myth that, oh God, I've got this great beginning, it'll just take over, the characters will take over, the images will take over, it will finish itself. That does not happen. Do not write until you have the last image, the last scene, the last word, you're absolutely certain of it, and you aim towards it. Always. All right, thank you.
We have one more question.
Hey?
We have one more question.
Yes.
Someone's raising their hand.
Oh, Diane.
Yes, I wanted to know how you decide the subject of your poem.
It varies. It varies. It's a really good question, and it's a question I ask myself, right? Okay, and it's more of a negative process than you might imagine. It frequently takes the form, what haven't I done? What haven't I thought about? Sometimes I visualize a map of the world, and I'll think, okay, what concept do I have of northern Finland? None. Cold, reindeer, oppressed Lapps. Okay, do I care? And I'll come to some place where I think, no, all right, I do care, or I should care, or I'm going to think about that. It doesn't necessarily mean I'll do research, but I will, or it isn't necessarily the Earth, it'll be some other planet, you can say, or some distant time. But I try not to repeat myself. I try always to challenge myself. I try to choose new subjects. I mean, what I try not to do is write just a standard Fred Pollack poem, because I know that 90% of what I write is going to be a standard Fred Pollack poem anyway.
Do you ever write about what's in the headlines?
Yeah. Well, that White House Talks was. And I was going to read the most uncharacteristic poem in this book.
Okay.
So I think I will.
Read.
Yeah.
It's very short. It's very short. And it's the least, thank you, it's the least characteristic poem in this book, and I have to find it. Ah, there it is, 60. Petting zoo. You can't hold adult koalas. They're brutal alike, grinned the keeper. Scream and bite, get tossed off branches. Doesn't quite fit the image? Instead, a baby clutching a mama-sized doll, eyes tightly, bulgingly closed as if learning. Then, in a wide, dusty, pebbly region, a wallaby lying on its side. Something of a cat's turn of the head, a cat's look, but with an athlete's, not an aesthete's boredom. The wombats, bow-legged behind a widely woven fence, looked rudimentary. Lego in furs. I liked them. One chewed heavily my thumb, wondering if I was a mushroom. They all felt like Velcro. Thank you all. It's been a wonderful audience. Wonderful audience. Buy it. I'll sign it.
That was going to be my very last, but I want to thank you all for coming to the El Baroque tonight. Please pick up a calendar. The bookstore is open, and there are books for sale in there, and please do support Fred Pollack, who came all the way from D.C. to be here at the El Baroque. Thanks for coming.